Hi, and welcome or welcome back. My name is Dr. Ben Young, a periodontist, practicing in San Antonio, Texas, which is really of no relevance to today's podcast, one I produce for my patients and anyone else who cares to listen. This episode can stand alone, but it is also a continuation of the last one, both being about one of my favorite subjects, Christmas. And I would like to stick with the theme started last time, talking about a different perspective on Christmas, one focused not on children, but adult sensibilities. This, therefore, will not be a traditional or a commercial view of Christmas. Last time, I ended by saying that I would go into talking about the Advent wreath. Since then, as I began to prepare for this podcast, I found I had bitten off too big a piece. Plus, as things often go, I discovered new thoughts and ideas that took me down a few different paths than originally anticipated. It just proves to me that life is not predictable, and so I decided to go with the creative flow, understanding that no one will be terribly heartbroken that I'm not talking about the Advent wreath. If you are, drop me a line, explain why this is. I would love to hear more. So, during this Christmas season, I would like to reflect on a single point of light. You can decide what this is for you. It can be a candle on an Advent wreath. It can be a candle on the dinner table or a star in the night sky. In your imagination, if you do not happen to be in a quiet, dark place lit by a single candle, or if you are not outside by yourself, away from city lights and noises, then imagine you are. And above you are stars, and you begin to study with your naked eye, no telescope required, a single point of light. Most of your view is darkness. It surrounds the light, but it doesn't hide it. It can't. Darkness represents the unknown. It represents fear and confusion. It can even represent evil and bad intentions. A dark heart is one filled with dark emotions, dark thoughts. You know what I'm talking about, without the necessity of me going into details. At times, we are in darkness, in confusion, filled with fear, and we are stuck, unable to truly discern where to go or what to do, until something changes. Something occurs or shows up, a single point of light. Light and darkness are not opposites. Darkness is just the absence of light. The power is in the light, not the darkness. And what is true in the physical world is also true in our emotional worlds and in our spiritual worlds, our interior lives. Light brings hope. Persistent darkness leads to despair. For this reason, we need, in order to survive the troubles of life, a little light, even a small candle, that points a way and can reflect our surroundings enough to give us a proper orientation. We don't need to know everything, which is actually an impossibility. And we don't even need to know more than we do right now, per se, even though it is a good thing, I think, to be inquisitive and continually thirsting for more knowledge. What I think we mostly need are a few reminders, things like Christmas, for example, coming around back into our view once a year, and especially when it's the darkest of days in our lives, to remind us that we are not alone. So, permit me to read you a few Bible passages that are not the normal part of the Christmas story. But first, let me say, it doesn't matter if you know anything about the Bible or Christianity or Christmas. If this describes you, then this also described me at age 18, having graduated from high school, when I first began to learn about the Bible and discovering the true Christmas story beyond Santa Claus and the elves. Now, for orientation's sake, the Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament, in modern Bibles, begins with the book of Genesis. The word Genesis means beginning. The Old Testament ends with the book of Malachi, which was written about 400 years before the beginning of the New Testament. This is important when we consider Christmas and how long people have waited for some word from God. The New Testament begins with the book called Matthew, which is the account of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus the Christ, shortened to Jesus Christ. In this book, you will find one of the two accounts that describe the Christmas story, the birth of Jesus. There are three other accounts of the life of Jesus in the New Testament. They all are at the beginning of the New Testament. The other three accounts follow the book of Matthew, and these are Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew and Luke tell the Christmas story about Bethlehem, angels, shepherds, the Magi or foreign dignitaries that come a long way following a star, and all the rest of it. The book of Mark, which is the shortest of the four, begins with Jesus as an adult. And the book of John contains a version of the Christmas story for those who will sit and ponder a bit about how it begins. So, of course, I would like to read you a few verses from this particular book, one more for the adult sensibilities. But first, again, still to provide helpful context, let me start at the very beginning and let me read to you the first 5 verses from the book of Genesis. It is likely familiar material to most, even without any religious background. It will become obvious why this connects with the book of John in just a moment. So, Genesis, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Now, here are the first 5 verses from the first chapter of the Gospel. Gospel means good news, by the way. The Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. For a lot of people who pick up the book of John and attempt to read it without understanding how it links to Genesis, it is almost impossible to understand what it is talking about. But note how many ideas are included in both passages. They both begin essentially at the beginning of the universe. And these accounts indicated that God precedes this particular beginning. He is outside the universe he created. Otherwise, he would be a creature like us and not a creator. In Genesis, God creates everything by speaking it into existence. He uses words. In the Gospel of John, God is revealed to not only speak to create, but he becomes a part of his own message. More about this in a moment. In Genesis, the first thing God speaks that is recorded is in verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In John 1:4, speaking about the Word, who is identified so far as being he or him, it says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." So let's stop here and connect a few dots. Fill in the blank. Life is to light as darkness is to what? Life is to light as darkness is to, the answer is death. Light is to light as darkness is to death or non-life. In him was life. He is life and came with life, and he radiated the fact that he had the life mankind needs by the light his life displayed. I'm not sure how many children could grasp this one, but if you have lived long enough, I think it can begin to make sense. It just takes some time to reflect. And now, here is the Christmas story in one verse, as told by the fisherman and disciple of Jesus, whose name was John. It's found a little further down in verse 14, and it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." The Word described in the first 5 verses was with God in the beginning and was God himself, helping even in the process of creation. That Word became flesh, put on skin, became a human being, the one born in a manger in the city of Bethlehem to a teenager by the name of Mary. And how does John know this? Because he, along with others, state that they have seen his glory, the light from his life, and that it was, and I quote, "the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." And that's what we need, isn't it? We need grace, kindness, gentleness, love, hope, encouragement, the attributes of light, as opposed to condemnation, meanness, harshness, indifference, and despair, which describe darkness. But we also need truth. We need a light that points us in the right direction. When I heard all of this, did I buy it? Hardly. It took a lot of time, and it took interacting with people who could explain and debate with me until I could come to the point where I simply accepted that following even the dimmest light, representing all the good attributes I wanted to have more in my own life, was better than flailing around in the dark attempting to define meaning simply from my own limited experiences and warped imagination. And how hard is it really to find God? Not very hard at all. It just starts, I think, with words of appreciation, words of thanksgiving, even in moments of sadness. Perhaps Christmas, with all of its joys, is a good place to start, to be reminded that we're grateful that God wanted to come and live with us. Well, this concludes this year's episodes of the Perio Patient Podcast, and I am grateful for you. Merry Christmas, and may you be richly blessed in the new year and always. Oh, and just FYI, I am able to track where in the world this podcast is picked up, and it turns out there are people listening in about a dozen countries. So if you are somewhere outside San Antonio, say you live in other states and cities, as well as other countries, and you listen regularly, I sure would love to know more about you. Please drop me a line. It would be fun to talk. My email address is ben@, and it's my full name with a middle initial, ben@Benjamin, BENJAMIN, W Young, YOUNG.com. Thanks again for listening. Bye for now. When life gives you melons, you're dyslexic